that we haven't learned is that New Orleans is a curtain raiser in terms of climate change, in terms of global warming. Because if you want to see what Miami's going to look like, Lower Manhattan's going to look like 50, 100 years from now if we do nothing about global warming, go to New Orleans today, because sea level is rising. People are going to live and work behind levees below sea level in Miami if we don't stop global warming. Same in Lower Manhattan. So we've learned that, or at least a lesson is taught, that this was a natural disaster that can be replicated across all our coastlines unless we, one, rebuild the levees, rebuild the barrier islands and wetlands, and stop global warming. I mean, the thing is, John F. Kennedy in 1961 went before a joint session of Congress and said, we're going to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, bring him home safely again. What was amazing about that was not only the tight deadline, but the key technology needed to get a man to the moon and back didn't exist in 1961. We had a national policy, didn't have the technology, came in on deadline. With global warming and saving New Orleans, completely the opposite. We have the technology. We have the hybrid cars, the windmills, the levee technology. We can rebuild the barrier islands and wetlands. We don't have a policy. We don't have a national commitment to get the job done.
Right. There are two things you said now that really strike me as barriers. Not that they're insurmountable, but as barriers to accomplishing the task that needs to be accomplished that you raise in this book, The Ravaging Tide. In no particular order. Number one, your point about a lack of policy. To the extent that we don't have a president, a Congress, and sort of policy to deal with these issues that you raise, those that we control, that is to say, the levees, which we build, and the wetlands, which we, of course, can restore. That's one issue, the issue of a lack of policy.
Right.
The other issue, though, is a lack of traction on the conversation about global warming. So that if you can't get policy, good public policy, through Congress, with support of the White House, that's a problem. But on top of that, if you can't get a conversation about global warming, which you tell me now is the coming threat, then you got a real problem. And I don't know, I don't want to be pessimistic here at the second anniversary, but I don't see either one of those things really taking hold right now. I mean, the conversation about global warming is like a volley. You got some scientists saying it's real, others saying it's not. I mean, how do you get traction on that?
There are no viable scientists who are really saying it's not happening. I mean, even the president in the State of the Union address in January said global warming is real, it's getting worse, and human beings are involved. So we know that it's happening. The science is in. It's just a matter of, Dr. Martin Luther King said sometimes it's only on the darkest nights that you can really see the stars. And I believe right now we're in a dark period when it comes to climate change, when it comes to Katrina. But we see where we can go. We know that there's a better future through clean energy. I mean, clean energy, the multiplier benefits of hybrid cars and wind farms and the efficient amazing. No more wars in Iraq. I mean, if Iraq's #1 export was broccoli, would we be there? My 22-year-old nephew gets shot at almost every day in Baghdad with the 82nd Airborne. No more 9/11s, and we solve global warming. So the stars are there. We know where we need to go. It's a dark period, but I believe we'll get there.
Let me pressure on that, because I'm not as optimistic.
Okay.
And I want to pressure on that because, again, the point I'm making here is if we see New Orleans, we see Katrina with our own eyes, we see the damage that was done, we see 2 years later not enough has been done to put that city back where it was, much less better than what it was. This is something that we see, and we haven't found the capacity, whatever that means, to deal with it. Now here you come telling me again that the coming threat is global warming, one that most of us, quite frankly, for all the talk, with all respect to Mr. Gore, it's one that most of us still have not connected to. So if we can't deal with what we are seeing, how do we find the traction, the courage, the political will to deal with what many people are not seeing, what they're not connected to? That's my concern.
Well, I guess the question is, are we really seeing what's happening in Katrina? I mean, you look at the Iraq War, we see it every day. We see the bloodshed. We see the political disagreements. We see it every day. You know why? Because the president's looking in that direction every day, where the president says, this is my focus, this is what's important. That's where the international and U.S. media focus on, and we get doses of it. What we see is a tragedy, where the president is not focusing, where he's not pointing is Katrina, where he's not focusing, where he's not pointing is global warming. If we had a different leader who said, you know what, this Iraq thing didn't work out, here are the real problems. The real problems are, we're going to rebuild this great city of New Orleans, because it's a matter of right versus wrong. It's a moral issue. And the same, I'm going to focus on global warming too, because it's all about preserving all our cities and all our peoples in the world, and point to that. Then the media will focus on it, and the American consciousness will be focused on it, and we will finally embrace these solutions that are within our grasp. It's a matter of focus, leadership, and policy.
Let me go back to what you said earlier about America's coastal cities. So a lot of folk looking at New Orleans saying, even 2 years later, what a tragedy, what a shame. And yet they live in places, to your earlier point, where they may be experiencing the same kind of thing in the future. What do we say to those persons in those cities? And what kind of cities are we talking about?
Well, we're vulnerable as a nation. I mean, half our population lives within 100 miles of coastlines. I mean, you look at Miami, there's almost no part of Miami that's greater than 3 feet above sea level. Right now, James Hansen, America's most credible and famous climate scientist, probably in the whole world, says that unless we get off of fossil fuels as fast as we can, by the end of the century, we're going to be measuring sea level rise in terms of meters of sea level rise. So Miami below sea level, behind levees, you're getting hit by bigger and bigger hurricanes. We know hurricanes are also getting bigger because of climate change. Lower Manhattan, Charleston, Washington, D.C., the Potomac is a tidal river right through downtown D.C. It goes on and on. We are all New Orleanians. I mean, that is one of the lessons, whether it's been learned or not, it was taught. We are all New Orleanians now, and if we don't save this city, this great city of New Orleans, who's going to come to save you in Lower Manhattan? Who's going to come save you in Miami? Who's going to save, coastal Virginia and Maryland, where I live, if we don't take care of this one city? And by doing that, we've got it. Again, we have the technology. We can rebuild the levees. We can rebuild the Barrier Islands. But on top of that whole thing, if we don't solve global warming, the levees don't matter. They don't matter.
Let me ask you in 30 seconds right quick. For when all said and done, the story that resonates still for me is the plight of the everyday people in New Orleans. So for everyday people watching right now in these other coastal cities where this is going to happen somewhere down the road, we say to them what? About what they can do.
Well, that's one of the bright spots from Katrina is everyday people went down there by the tens of thousands. Faith folks, students have gone and repaired buildings and rolled up their sleeves and done a lot. And that's the spirit of America. We need a government that matches that spirit, that takes the common spirit of the everyday man in America and uses it in the service of saving everyday people.
The author of By Farewell that predicted New Orleans, that predicted Hurricane Katrina before it hit New Orleans. Now he has another book out that we should pay attention to. It's called The Ravaging Tide, Strange Weather, Future Katrinas, and the Coming Death of America's Coastal Cities. Mike Tidwell is his name. Mike, nice to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you here. That's our show for tonight. Catch